Okay, so in this episode, I'm going to start peeling back the onion just a little more. You know, I'm trying to keep these not going too long because I don't want people, to start, zoning out when they're watching these things. But so one of the things that I want to clarify for people, because this is also a point of confusion, and that is John and Tim, no matter what you think, no matter what anyone tells you, I'm telling you, we're always, always, always using deception in everything they did. And the reason they were using deception was because they were countering any possibility of you having enough time to do something. So, what do I mean by deception? First of all, let's get into a little Sun Tzu, the art of war. What does Sun Tzu say? All warfare is based on deception. Works for me, right? What would Musashi say? When you cause them to flinch, you've already won. Makes perfect sense. I mean, who are you going to listen to? A guy who was in 60 life and death duels, or somebody, giving you some other kind of advice? So John and Tim were always using deception in everything John did. And I always used to tell people from what Tim told me, is that when you're watching John do stuff, pay attention. Don't be like these other guys in the corner talking and doing their own thing, because he's giving away gold. And what Tim meant by that was, no matter what John says, no matter what he does, if you pay attention to what he's actually doing, you see, no matter what he's saying, he's always doing John. In other words, John wasn't imitating this guy or that guy. Even if he mentions people he had trained with, like Wei Sun Liao or Ik Jo Keng, he was still always doing John. And that's an important thing, And so when John would be moving with people, he was always using deception. That's how he made stuff work. Not just speed, not just power. Because John had the ability to change the tempo in the fight so quickly. A lot of times, the reason why, when you watch videos of him, he's doing a demo where he's working with somebody at speed, it looks like it's some corny kung fu movie stuff, is because he's throwing people's timing off so quickly that they literally get caught in stages of, they become, catatonic, so to speak. They get caught like that in that limbo. And so, what do I mean by deception? First of all, before John even touched you, he already changed his body in a way that's already causing you to behave a certain way. And what I want to point out is, it was even worse if he was doing it with you and you didn't, or you weren't kind of, indoctrinated into some of the stuff we're doing. And what I mean by that is, if you work with John long enough, just like anybody who works with me long enough, one of the problems, in a good way, is that people who work with me long enough get habituated to how my body moves. Whereas there are things I just can't do to them, because even if they're not consciously aware that they're tracking me, they're still tracking me. So it makes it harder to do certain things. Whereas a person who's not used to moving with me, which is kind of the point where I'm, training, it throws them off. It throws their timing off more, because their brain is trying to comprehend something that just happened in front of them that they obviously experienced, but they don't have the frame of reference to deal with, if that makes sense. So when I'm working with Frank, for example, the reason he doesn't panic, even though this is a demo, is because Frank works with me so much. There's nothing I'm doing here his brain is not aware of, so therefore he's not panicking, right? So now I'm gonna just do a demo. So one of the things John would do is, the first move, he moved towards you, it already happened. I know you can't see what I'm doing here, but he can feel what I'm doing. And this is the point I try to make about when people say, what is John doing? I don't understand. I said, well, you gotta be kind of like in the matrix with him to understand it, because he's doing something that's only personal to the person it's happening to, because he's doing it to throw that person off. So John's hand would come up in a position where you got to deal with it. If you go to hit his hand, he anticipates that he punches you. If you don't deal with it and you hesitate, he hits you. And he had the ability to make that decision in a microsecond. And the reason is because he had enough time to do it, because the way in which he moved in, or what he would call getting out of phase. He only used the word a couple of times, but it made perfect sense to me. Because I got frustrated. He kept telling me, no, I'm just stepping off the line. I'm just stepping off the line. I'm like, John, you're not just stepping off the line. You're doing something else. And so he finally got frustrated because I wouldn't let him off the dime when I was working out with him underneath the wisdom tree. And so he showed me how he not only stepped offline, and I talked about this before, but also how he would change the attitude of his body. That's a different thing. It's not just stepping. He's doing stuff with his body that my brain is picking up. And I'm trying to kind of adjust to it. And in that moment, I'm trying to make that adjustment, or I'm hesitating. That's when he's making his move and he's going to hit. So before it even touched you, it already happened. Then he made contact with you and his body would adjust again. See what I did there? I'll exaggerate. So I already moved here. I'm already in position to make that work, but I know he needs to do something to deal with it. So he goes to deal with it. He touches my hip, my body changed again. And because it wasn't such an overt, gross thing that John was doing, what happened is, until you experience it enough, and plus he explains it to you, that helped me a lot. He actually told me what he was doing. But what happened is, you didn't realize everything he needed to do to set you up already took place. And Tim would do the same thing. And Tim always set up his deceptions through touch, for the most part. That was just his preference. So John liked to throw people's sense of timing off through the shadow impression before he even made contact. And then when you made contact, staying as light as possible, he would do other things like, manipulating space, doing all kinds of other stuff, changing the attitude of his body and all that. Tim, he would have contact with you. Even if that contact started off with him stopping your hands, then he would make a subtle adjustment. You would try to respond to it, and then it would hit you, because he was pulsing a lot. He always pulsed. The other thing Tim would do is, Tim liked to do a lot of tool replacement for his deceptions. He would be like this. You feel your hand wanting to slip out. You want to hit with this other hand, and you want to hit with that other hand. You bring that hand over. He'd catch your hand. He'd cross your arms, and he'd hit you. And then he would tell you, don't let that happen again. Okay, Tim, right? I'll try to remember that, Tim, right? So Tim would also do these things that John would do, where he would touch your hands, and in a microsecond, he would shift his body. And that arm would just shift right down. See what I did? His hand would be here. In a microsecond, his hands all of a sudden following the contour, kind of like what I was showing, what John was showing me. He would follow that contour, find your elbow, and then he would start beating the crap out of you, and they would tell you, don't let that happen. Don't let me catch your elbow. Okay, Tim. So they both were constantly, this is the point I'm trying to make, because I can't even do all the things that they would do. Because they would be creating it right on the spot, especially John. John would be creating stuff on the spot where by the time you responded to it, he already changed it again, waiting for you to do something else. I've seen him do stuff with people who literally make people almost fall on the ground. He would throw their timing off where their bodies just couldn't respond fast enough. But they were always using deception. I just want to make people understand that. And that even when they were doing demonstrations, sometimes when the demonstrations kind of wouldn't look as good as they could, is because they could not be doing these things in the body, because it was so, habitual to the way they move. So they would be moving with people, and John would do stuff like this, and it's already over. Tim would be like this, you go to move, he'd stop you and he would hit you, because he made like 5,000 little adjustments in his body in like a microsecond. And by the time your brain processes it and is trying to respond, it's already too late. That's why I always tell people, it's like, I was at a workshop, I probably told the story in one of the other videos where, I was explaining, how John did stuff. And I said it, John argues one of the greatest hypnotists on the planet, because he could put people in catalepsy in a microsecond without even touching them, because he would move in a way that would alter your perception of timing. And the first thing that would happen is your brain would, wait a minute, did he just like move to the left? And it's already too late. The moment you went off on that tangent, trying to figure out on a subconscious competence level what he did, because it was outside your experience, you had no way of dealing with it. We went through this, in the Marine Corps and the Army, with IEDs. And, the instructors who came in and helped us build our programs, they were brilliant. And one of the things they said, that always stuck with me, these instructors, for the combat policing, combat patrolling course, and that is, if you can't see it in your mind, you can't see it with your eyes. And they just would reiterate that throughout the training. And the reason was obvious. If you can't conceive of somebody doing something, especially if they're using clandestine means to set you up, if you can't even conceive of it, you're not looking and seeing all the subtle little cues of things they're doing that could kill you. You know, what you don't know in combat will kill you. That was our motto. So it's the same thing here. There's all these little things we do. When I talk about we all have, there's a pattern to all human movement. There's all these little heuristics also of how every individual moves. Now, there are some general heuristics, as it was, that every human being moves with. You know, that's that general pattern. But when you work with someone long enough, and I'm just using this as an example, there are certain heuristics of how a person moves that over time you pick that stuff up. So when I'm working with Frank, because we fight like all the time, there are things that I do that he can deal with. Almost fell there. He can deal with because of the fact that he's so in tune with how my body moves. He's already picking up the motions and the subtle changes in my body as I'm trying to do stuff. Whereas he's already in the process of moving or changing it or anticipating it so he can redirect it. And this is what John and Tim were doing. You know, one of the things I give them a lot of credit for is they did have a lot of technique, but their technique wasn't so much, when this happens, I do this, when that happens, I do that. It was, when I experience this, these are the possible things that they gotta be. I already kind of know from this position what is possible, what is not, based on the relationship between our bodies. And I recognize the pattern, and I'm just not letting them do that. So it's not that they didn't know how to block things, use their hands, but what was driving the decision, and I guess that's what I'm trying to get across, what was driving the decisions they made was not some preordained thing per se. It was only preordained of how they would respond based on, they knew how to move their body to get out of the way of things or redirect people through their touch. And they were making the decision of how they were going to affect the other person within that paradigm. So for example, if John would approach somebody, he knew, okay, well, the last thing I want to do when I'm walking in is get hit. So I'm going to move to throw their timing off. And should they throw that punch, I know how to get out of the way and grab their hand and stop their arm. So that's what I mean by how when they would use technique, it wasn't, okay, from this position, I'm going to throw this block. No, it was, I'm moving in, I'm going to hit you. You either deal with it or not. And if you move and change, I have enough experience in the body, you know, whereas to a high degree of probability, I'm going to be able to deal with that because I also know how to get out of the way. And I've also developed what Tim used to call purposeful habits that allowed me to be able to do things where I didn't have to think about it because those habits were so ingrained in me. I couldn't do anything else but the right thing, so to speak.